I don't know if you feel like this, but maybe it's like it's the Overwatch experience. Maybe it's just sort of esports in general. But like, I've definitely got trust issues with esports, right? Like nothing ever feels solid. Yeah, it always feels like you're just like one random person's decision away from like just losing everything.
Let's move on from Overwatch. It's been obviously a long discussion, but it was like a very key part of your career and like a formative, I would sort of say, stage of you growing into the caster and person that you are in esports now. But one thing that maybe a lot of people don't know about you, and this is maybe jumping back in the timeline a little bit, but I wanted to keep all of the Overwatch stuff together, was you were involved in a show called Esports Central at one point as well. So this is a bit of a throwback. And it's funny because, like, you know how I said I looked up that Overwatch VOD where you were like talking to old mate and doing stuff. Like, I can find a lot of stuff from your Overwatch career and that kind of thing. But if you go hunting for Esports Central content, it's fucking hard to find. Like, there really isn't a whole lot at all. The best thing that I can kind of find, and the only reason that I know that it was like somewhere in 2018, was that like I looked up on Twitter. You know how you can do advanced search? I said like from Genome. Esports Central, and so like there was like 2 or 3 tweets from you talking about something about Esports Central, but like the Twitter doesn't exist anymore. It belongs to like some Brazilian or Portuguese or something.
Sold the handle, I think.
Company. There's no videos on YouTube or Facebook or anything. I can't even remember where it was. And look, to be honest, I can barely remember anything about Esports Central because if I recall, it really only lasted for like 6 months or something like that. Not a very long time. There wasn't a lot of
I think we had like 22 shows or something.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's just start from the beginning, because if I remember rightly, this had like some fairly significant backer. Was it involved with like Crown Casino or something? Crown Bet, which is so Crown Bet is like a subsidiary of Crown, I assume.
Probably. It was a gambling company, basically. Yeah, I can't remember if they'd already maybe split off from Crown, like the casino at that point. But yeah, they were. It was just like, you know, another online bookie, basically. You know, they do lots of shows for, you know, I think there was some good names. There was some solid like Australian sporting names there at the same time. Like there was a Hawthorn player I used to look up to, I think, who was working with them at the same time. I feel like they had maybe like Ricky Ponting or something like that as well for the cricket show. So like, you know, big names. So yeah, like getting asked by them to do an esports show was like, cool.
Well,
okay. So I'm totally on the same level as Ricky Ponting, man.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes, I mean, but one of those things that I've realized in esports is sometimes you just got to shoot your shot. You know, you got to fake it till you make it, because like if you just say, I'm not that big a deal, then people are gonna be like, oh, I'll just go with someone else. It's like, well, fuck. But anyway, besides the point, what I did want to ask there was like, was it a case of like they came to you, or was there like an audition process? Because I feel like, was there an audition process?
It was, actually. Yeah, there was. Which, you know, as Pal before I was saying like, oh man, like interviews don't happen in esports. Like I feel like this is probably like the only interview thing I've ever did. Which, funnily enough, I kind of like, you know, I got picked out everyone to do it, which was super cool because so essentially it was a journalist from Fox News, not Fox News, Fox Sports, which is not to be, you know, confused with the crazy right-wing people. Fox Sport called Max Lawton, really cool guy. They sort of got in touch with him as the sort of like the producer, and he sort of like put the idea of the show together. And then, they put out a casting call. They basically wanted, so Max was going to host it as well as produce it. And then they wanted like a co-host, and then they wanted some other people to be sort of like the subject matter esports experts and like interviewers and stuff like that. So you know, you had to like present a little segment, put some stuff together. I think mine was actually to do with XQC. Because this is right back when
he was a pro player, right?
Yeah, when he was an Overwatch player before he became the, you know, whatever, just
streamer.
Constant source of drama that he is right now. And yeah, mine was something to do with him. And I remember, we were doing it, like my girlfriend was helping me, like we taped 2 phones together, one to record and one taped the other one on the back of it that had like a scrolling, it was like an auto
A
prompter
telestrator,
kind of
yeah.
thing. Yeah. So we like
autoprompt,
taped these two phones together so we could do it like this, and I could read off the teleprompter and like record this thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, look, it must have been pretty good because I was hoping just to be like, the Overwatch expert or whatever. But yeah, I guess they liked me the best out of all the people who sort of went for it, and I got the co-host role, which is awesome because it meant that you were on every week rather than just every couple of weeks.
Yep.
And yeah, that was my first like sort of solid esports job because it was essentially like a part-time job. You'd go in one day a week, you do your research for the topics we were sort of talking about every week. It was quite well structured. And we'd sort of I think we'd focus on one game, and then we'd sort of do some general questions. So there was some fun stuff we did, like it was like the capital S debate in esports, and esports in education, like all this kind of other fun stuff. And then we'd also talk about like Dota or CS or LOL generally, maybe a bit of Overwatch in there occasionally. But the big ones. So yeah, and it was a pretty cool show, and it was just great in terms of having like a consistent income and being like, wow, this is crazy. And then CrownBet got bought out, and they just axed the show immediately.
Yep.
That was
tends to be how things go when you're working with the mainstream world. I feel like in esports we don't really get that much because these esports companies and entities, they're all like all in on esports, and it's like, oh well, we've got to keep this. But if it was like, I don't know, in some world where like, I don't know, just to say a fucking name, like Fox would buy out ESL, which I know obviously ESL's a global company or whatever, but let's say they bought the ESL Australia contingent, I can just see them like going through like 5 shows and just being like, this is gone, we don't give a fuck, this is gone, all right, we're keeping that, and that's it. And sometimes that's just how it is, right?
Yeah, no, but like it wasn't actually like that. It was almost the opposite, right? They were like, when we started, they were like, dude, we just like we don't get rid of shows. Like they're like, hey, here's our cricket show or whatever. It's been running for like 300 episodes. They just go forever. And it was literally only because the entire company got bought out that they kind of like changed everything around. So that was a bit of a blow.
Was it like
I had a lot of fun with that.
Lucrative gig at the time? Because like I know what you would have been getting in terms of like the money from esports at the time, and like it was still pretty pissed back then in terms of like day rates and that kind of thing. But for this, was this like kind of legit more so because it was a bit more mainstream?
I remember. It was I mean like gambling money, right? Like
exactly, that's what I'm saying.
I'm trying to remember if it was either 250 or 500 a day. I'm leaning towards 250. And that was like to go in for a 2-hour shoot at their offices in the city in Melbourne, and also to like do the prep throughout the week for it.
So it's still not that great in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
If that was the case. If it was 500 at that time, I think 500 is pretty good at the time. But 250 was like more in line with kind of like esports pay at the time, So
yeah, give me your next question. I'll quickly.
It doesn't
try to go through my email and try and see if I've got.
It doesn't really matter. It was more of as an aside. But I just was kind of curious whether or not maybe the involvement coming through from like a bigger sponsor might have bumped the rate up to a little bit more like of a standard.
It felt like a lot of money at that time.
Well, maybe that's all that.
Getting nothing.
I don't need to know the specific figure, but like I think that's the takeaway, is that like this was actually kind of something that was pretty good, rather than just like maybe a side gig or whatever. Who else was like involved in this? Because I remember Max, obviously. I remember you, and I think Michelle Mannering as well. I remember being involved, but was there anybody else?
Yeah. So
Rob Monday, was he?
Rob Monday was there. He was the CS guy. San, who still got a lot of friends from that crew actually. Like San, who now works for Bliss, I think, and has worked for like Meta Esports and like Snowball and stuff in the past. There was a wandering, like on Twitter, Tom Anderson, who a wandering bard on Twitter, who now does some Dota casting, but he's probably better known now for doing like Magic the Gathering, and like he does a lot of like card games and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think I've heard of him.
He was sort of the Dota guy at the time. And then Anne Dundas, who was doing like some interviews and stuff. Yeah. yeah, that was about the crew. So no, there was some solid talent honestly on that show. Yeah.
Sweet. So I mean, obviously that like wraps up, and again, we're jumbling the timelines a little bit, but you're sort of doing that while you're being involved in Overwatch a little bit as well. But that's wrapped up at a certain point. Overwatch is kind of starting to come to a close for you as well. I seem to recall there was like a little bit of a period where maybe you stepped away from esports, not necessarily like so much as I'm not doing esports anymore, but like it was like maybe a year period or 2 year period. I don't know
going on.
Don't know how long it was where there wasn't much going on. So like, what were the circumstances around that? You didn't really find anything.
Yeah, no, nothing to sort of hang my hat on really. Overwatch, I wasn't getting the Overwatch gigs anymore. I hadn't sort of moved to another game. I hadn't found something else that kind of lit the fire for me, because I don't think I'll ever be someone who kind of like just takes a gig for the hell of it. Like, I think
except if Overwatch comes back, of course.
Well, that'd be therapy, Elfish. That wouldn't be the hell. That'd be working through my issues.
Yeah,
yeah.
I see. I feel you.
Yeah. So I was still very interested. I was still watching a lot of stuff, but I just didn't sort of have a game that had kind of worked out for me at that point. So I was just like on the lookout for other stuff, and that's when I started to notice other games like kind of Apex coming along, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously this is the crux or the main point of your career, where we are obviously now going to start to talk about Apex Legends, and this is what you're at this point now most well known for. I think maybe at the start of your Apex career, people would have still kind of considered you an Overwatch guy, but like now you're very much an Apex guy first, and then it's like, some of the other games are like ancillary titles or something that you just get involved in on the side a little bit. But you're very much an Apex guy through and through. I've looked at your Twitter literally this morning, and it's just like Apex tweets, retweets from Apex players and teams and orgs and stuff like that. So like it's obviously very much where your career has gone. So let's talk Apex. This is probably going to go for a little while. We're going to go through the history of when you first started, how Longshot came to be, linking up with Roots and getting that all sorted, and getting your first couple of international gigs and that kind of thing. So it's a pretty in-depth kind of career, I feel like, for you now in Apex. And was that sort of this is a dumb question really, but was that the expectation at the start, right? Like when you first got into Apex, were you looking at that and thinking, this is the next Overwatch for me, in a sense, like I'm gonna really go all in on Apex and I love this game and this is gonna be what I want it to be, and I'm gonna go and be the Apex guy in APAC South? Because it happened around like 2020 or maybe late 2019 when you started to look at Apex, and this was obviously just as COVID was kind of starting to kick off as well. So there's that little bit of extra ball game getting thrown in too.
Yep. Which is part of it as well. I think so during that period, I guess as I said, I was still consuming a lot of esports stuff, right? Like I was still spending my life on Twitter, watching stuff. I was still I also watched a lot of like esports, like business podcasts and stuff like that, right? So I don't know if anyone remembers, there was a guy who used to run an org called Splice, who had some big teams that isn't really around so much anymore. What was his name? Marty.
It's like an NA org, right?
Yeah. But he did a couple of like good business podcasts, whatever, like other people who put out that sort of content. Like I'd also watch a lot of that. And I think that was part of me looking at games from two different perspectives. Because as I said, right, with Overwatch, it was like getting in on the ground floor is very important. Like that is genuinely like a key part of my strategy as talent and getting involved in games. Like after you've sort of made it, it's a lot easier to transfer across, right? But until you sort of get to a certain level in esports, it's very hard to crack in. There's just so much resistance to it. And so, I was always kind of like, looking at what was the next big thing coming out. And I was looking from two different perspectives, right? One from me as a gamer who just plays games every day and have done for like pretty much my entire life. And one from this sort of esports business perspective of like, is this actually going to be a successful esport on several fronts, right? Like, is it a good game? Are enough people going to play it? Is it going to get to a critical mass where you can actually create a decent ecosystem around it? And, there was a lot of, many years of, having, I guess at that point, the only publisher I'd really sort of worked with was Blizzard. but had, was always taking notice of, how does Valve treat CS and Dota? How does Riot treat League of Legends? And so trying to work out all these variables about all the different sort of esports ecosystems. And I looked at Apex and I was like, all right, like this is a really good game. I think just at its core, like I said, like I've been playing CS for like 20 years or whatever, right? So as just like a source game, it had that kind of cool feel with movement, surf maps, all that kind of stuff. Had this kind of feel about it, and it started to do well. EA was like a bit of an unknown quantity, I think, in terms of like how they were going to deal with it as an esport, because up till then they'd only really had, I would say, FIFA as like a
Yeah,
successful esport, and that was kind of hard to track their movements, because it doesn't, FIFA's never really felt like a core esport, right? It's
100%.
like
Yep.
it feels
It's
like
its
it
own
has a
thing.
lot of success because of the massive casual player base that it has, and how that sort of translates. So it was really hard to gauge what they'd throw at Apex. And of course, then you got to look at all the context of how Apex started off, and the fact that, we just had kill races for a
Yep.
while. Like we
For
didn't
a
even have
long time.
proper
Yeah.
Apex competition, right? But yeah, look, what were my choices at that point? Like, how many games come along that really have that chance to, like, let's put the bar at cracking into tier one, right? Which I would say personally, like, I think is only CS, League of Legends, and Dota at the moment, tier one in esports. I think everything else is below that. There's like a clear separation in esports. And so I was really looking for something that could, that could be big and could do well. And I, yeah, there was maybe a bit of a gamble on the sort of the publisher side, or like how they were going to run the esports side of it. And I think they've done incredibly well since then for a lot of different reasons. As I was talking about before, like learning lessons from a lot of these other publishers and esports that have been run in the past, like, allowing third-party tournaments, like supporting that kind of stuff, but also having a publisher-run league. Obviously, that's, jumping ahead a little bit, I suppose, but so I think there was a lot of good structure coming out there from EA when they started doing things like the X Games and like the Poland preseason invitational and that sort of thing. So yeah, just like looking at Apex as a whole and being like, is this going to be worth my time to get into? And I was just like, yeah, I think it is.
Hmm. And obviously, I guess in hindsight, the answer was yes. But at the time, obviously, you guys had to do a fair bit of work to sort of get this off the ground. And like, we're talking even pre-ALGS days at this point, like Longshot,
Yep.
maybe even pre-Longshot. Like, I don't know at what point in the timeline do you start casting Apex, but also when does Longshot come in? Like, is it at the same time? Is it like, okay, we're going to make Longshot and we're going to cast and we're going to do Apex? Or did you start casting before Longshot comes into the discussions?
No, it was exactly the same time. Yeah. So
Right.
the very first thing ever was like there was this tournament, a mogul tournament. Like, do you know
Yep.
mogul, which is
Esports Mogul.
um yeah, a little bit of a meme in terms of, whatever, they were an ASX listed company that seemed to be just burning money.
Yep.
And one of the ways they burnt that money was to put on a $50,000 Apex tournament very early on and in the game's life. And it was a kill race tournament, of course, because that's all you could do back then. There weren't custom servers, which is kind of like when Apex came out, I was just basically just kind of the waiting room, just being like, okay, when's the actual esports going to start? Because kill races are just, they're pretty whatever, right? And yeah, we had a little bit, like I talked to Mogul a little bit about putting on a broadcast for that, but it was pretty tough technically because couldn't get in the game. You would have to be essentially like taking in just restreams of people playing the game and like broadcasting that somehow, which is like kind of doable, but it was also like um a little bit pre like co-streaming as a concept. Like co-streaming wasn't really very big back then. So I feel like even legality wise and stuff, you'd look at something and be like that and be like, oh, I don't know about that. Whereas nowadays, basically everyone doesn't give a fuck as far as how legal it is to be just stealing someone else's content and rebroadcasting.
We can get
it,
into
right?
that, by the way. That's a discussion topic for later.
Okay.
The whole co-streaming
Right.
discussion, because I know you're going to have some hot takes on that.
Yeah, but like that was something, it was still back then where it was like, oh yeah, maybe we shouldn't do that because it's not allowed. So yeah, we talked to them, didn't end up getting off the ground. But then the next thing that happened, essentially, the thing that really was the kind of like light bulb moment where I was like, oh, okay, here's the opportunity, right? I saw a tweet from Bullet. So this was when they'd started ALGS. Okay, so they must have just come out with custom servers. At this point, you only could get them either in ALGS or like these scrims that GLL were running. And he put out this tweet and he's like, "Lol, I just came second in some tournament and won like 10 grand." And I looked it up and I was like, I hadn't heard anything about these Apex tournaments. And I was like, that's weird, dude. Why is there a tournament for this much money? Because this was in what, I don't know, 2020 maybe. Um, that like 10 grand as a prize in ANZ, like that's a lot of money. There was a lot
There's a
of
lot, yeah.
money in this tournament. And I was just like, how is there not a broadcast for this? Hello? Like no one puts up that amount of cash without putting up a broadcast. Like most of like the most venerated tournaments and in any other esport in ANZ at this point, like would be spending that, like, you know, they would 100% be putting on a broadcast for anything like that. So I was just like, this is super weird. Why is no one doing this? So then I started looking into it and I was just like, all right, cool. Because at this point, by the way, I was unemployed. This was just after COVID had started. And I'd started working for a travel company.
Awesome.
Yep, good timing. I literally did like a 3-month unpaid internship, learning
Wow.
like search engine marketing stuff. Because at that point it was just like, well, I don't know, I've got nothing better to do. Like, I want to try. You know, esports wasn't looking great. I was like, got to learn something. You know, like mental health struggles and other stuff had like sort of you know, man, I never finished my degrees at uni or whatever. So, you know, like career path options, like I'd had a lot of just like crappy kind of jobs up until then. So I was trying to find something that, you know, maybe I'd be able to like actually kind of make something out of. And yeah, so I did this internship. They offered me, like, you know, did a great job. It was all fun. They offered me a paid job, and then literally 3 months into the, you know, the unpaid part, I did 2 weeks of paid work for them. I can still remember this email they sent around, like after like maybe a couple days after sort of like COVID had started coming out, and like we'd heard about some like layoffs in like some other travel company, and they were like, "We are pleased to announce that, you know, like we're not doing any like layoffs or whatever at this time, and like everyone's gonna like keep their job." And then like a couple of days later, and they were just like, "Oh, actually, no, wait, like COVID's literally shutting the world down. Lol, no one's traveling. Like this ain't gonna happen, huh?"
Yeah.
And yeah, so of course, you know, it was just GG, like travel company, like bam, gone overnight. And so yeah, at that point I was just like not in a good place for like a bunch of reasons. That was one of them. And yeah, so I kind of just like started diving into Apex because I didn't have a lot else going for me at that point. And I'd seen this tweet from Bullet. It was just like, all right, cool. Like someone should be broadcasting. This is just wild that this is not happening. So I'm going to start just trying to get something together, right?
Mhm.
So that was when Longshot started. We At that point, EA were running broadcasts for North America, I believe, and Europe, which they still are, but they weren't running them for any of the minor regions. So they were putting the money towards it. They put the prize pools were there. The competitions were happening. This was essentially top level Apex, right? But they just weren't getting broadcast, and it was just like it was crazy. So we just started doing whatever we could. Uh, so basically, I saw this opportunity. I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to do some broadcasts. Sounds like fun. I've wanted to get into Apex. I've been kind of waiting for the esports scene to take off, for custom lobbies to happen, for it to become an actual esport. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll just get another caster and I'll grab someone to like do obs and sort of like, you know, direct it for us because, you know, as casters, we think the show revolves around us. And so, you know, obviously the right proportion of people putting a broadcast together is 2 casters and 1 person behind the scenes, right?
Seems good.
That's a good amount. Yeah, for sure. So I called up Judge, who I'd, you know, worked with over a couple of things. Been, you know, saw him through like CG and some other stuff previously. And I always really liked Roots' work as an observer. Like when we went and did contenders in Overwatch, Roots was doing obs with MC. And I remember just being like, oh my God, these guys are so good. I was like, dude, they're literally better than like some of the Overwatch League observing I watch. And so I was like really impressed with them. And I'd always just gotten along well with Roots when we'd like met up at events and stuff. So I was like, yeah, hey man, like I don't want to come like do some obsing for us, and like me and Judge will cast, and we'll just do these tournaments and just like see what happens. Because I feel like we were all sort of in a similar space to some extent, where like as we've just talked about, I was kind of like we were a bit on the outer, right? Like we'd had some experience in esports in the past, and we'd done some stuff, but like none of us really had like steady gigs. We weren't like at the top of any scene, like sort of doing anything particularly amazing. So it was like, you could kind of ask them to be like, hey, let's just do this thing for free and see what happens, and like whatever, right? Yeah. So we kind of just started it like that, started doing some scrims, and then eventually we the community kind of picked up on that. That was like sick. Finally, someone's like giving us some attention and kind of getting into this. And yeah, and from there, like started to rep us to EA and be like, yeah, hey, why aren't we getting our tournaments broadcast? It's kind of weird that like, it's not happening in this region. And that eventually got us in touch with EA, which is where the real shit kind of started to happen.
Yeah, so before we actually do get into that discussion, I want to sort of touch a little bit more on like the formation of Longshot, because I did an In Retrospect episode with Roots. I don't know if you've watched that, but we did go into that a little bit. So I'll put a link, subtle plug. If anyone wants to watch it, up in the corner there, or maybe down in the description. And you can get Roots' POV of how this all sort of came together. And in his discussion, he sort of said like you guys invested like $5-6 grand or something like that on equipment and stuff early on in the piece. So I don't know if you like remember this, or like what was the kind of like the buy-in, because to me, like, especially given the circumstances you've told me, that seems like an insane buy-in in terms of a financial sense to sort of, when COVID's happening, you maybe don't have a job, like you're not sure where you're going with this. It's like, was it, like at what point did you guys really like decide, okay, we're going to go all in on this versus, oh, we're just doing this for fun? Because like once you actually put that kind of money into it, you're kind of like, okay, well, I need to get something back out of this, I assume. At least that's how I would think.
Look, Roots has a lot of good qualities. I don't know if his memory is one of them, honestly.
He's just embellishing the story a little bit.
I think, I personally didn't put any money into it. He may have, I think he might have invested a bit. I'm not sure if it was $5-6 grand. Honestly, maybe it was, and he's just like, he just didn't tell me about it. Honestly, like it could have been. I think I do remember him like upgrading one of his PCs, I think, to try and make because like he was doing the streaming from his joint, obviously. I do remember him like maybe like grabbing an extra PC or something. I'm not sure it was that expensive, but it was, yeah, like it wasn't like we weren't a company yet, right? Like we were a logo on Twitter.
Just like every other esports org in Oceania.
Yeah, we were literally like a JPEG org at that point, right? So if there was any initial investment, it might have just been like a computer upgrade or something like that, because it was really only when we got our first contract with EA when that kind of stuff kicked off a lot more. I feel like I've always been pretty like conservative as far as this stuff goes. Like, obviously there's, well, it's kind of drying up now, isn't it? Right. With, like the whole like VC ventures and all this kind of stuff, and just like, yeah, like pump in the money now and then like it'll grow later. Like I'm very much not like that. I'm like, no, let's live within our means and like try and do whatever we can until it becomes feasible. And at the start, it was, yeah, like as you saw, it was pretty bare bones, right? It was literally just the three of us, sometimes the two of us. And yeah, I guess for the formation, there wasn't, yeah, I don't think it was quite that full on, right? And like, and to be fair, like it did pay off pretty quickly, because it was only 6 months after we started that we got that contract.
All right, well, let's talk about that then. Obviously, this is kind of where things really start to snowball a little bit for you and for Longshot and I feel like for Apex Legends Esports in APAC South as well, like to a degree, it felt like it was kind of flying under the radar until ALGS really started to get going. But I want to sort of talk about, Longshot in general, because this is the point where, as you say, you're starting to now earn some money off of it. You're kind of the legitimized broadcast. You're the official broadcast partner of ALGS, which, for those that don't know, is like basically the premium tier Apex Legends Esports. Now, ALGS over in North America and Europe is like broadcast on the Play Apex channel. It's on all the main, Twitter and everything like that. But it's very different for APAC South. APAC South was basically like, here you go, Longshot. It's yours, more or less. Like, do it on your own channel. You do all the socials. We don't really tweet about you. We don't really, we're not hands-on at all, basically, is the TLDR that I'm going to go. So this is kind of like your product in a sense, even though it's an ALGS product. It's an official broadcast for Apex Legends. So talk to me about like creating the brand for Longshot, creating how you guys wanted to make the show, what kind of branding you wanted to have, what kind of graphics you wanted to have, what kind of show you wanted to have. Talk to me a little bit about that. Was there like ever a conversation about what's the ethos maybe of Longshot or how we want to do this show, or was it just like we're just gonna do it and sort of learn as we go?
Yeah, I mean, it all happened extremely quickly. So, yeah, it's not like we've had, maybe since then, we've had time to sort of like plan things out sort of on that grander scale a little bit more. But even then, it has seemed like a lot of things in esports, like things happen last minute and you're just like, all right, just got to do it. But I guess talking about starting out, like I was incredibly lucky to get Roots on board, right? In a lot of ways. Because as I said, the original thought was literally just like, let's get two casters and an observer, which is what I knew him at that point. And like the upside of having Roots and like him turning into someone who is now like directing our entire show, right? But also, all these things I didn't know at the time, like, he was like doing coding as a job, and that translated into him being able to like make all of these like custom backends for our show, these like scoring sheets and all this stuff that we used early on to automate our scoring systems, which he put like an incredible amount of work into, which is like not something that I could have ever done or touched, but also not something like I realized he was like kind of bringing to the table like when we started out. So the fact that it's like evolved into all this more a much bigger product and a real like legitimate esports show is still honestly like a little bit crazy to me. And it's I kind of wonder how sort of just like lucky or unusual that was. And here's a funny throwback. I remember, I think it was Ducky did a similar style interview with Xenox, like a sort of in retrospect style one with Xenox, like a couple of years back or something, right? And he was talking about, before Contenders started up, and we were kind of being like, oh, maybe we can do some sort of stuff like this. And in that interview, he's like, but that was like, but we couldn't have, like, it was too hard. It never would have happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually like it's wild that I feel like almost kind of the same thing happened again, but like we actually made it work.
We did it.
Like we actually did it, And I think, partly that's, me sort of like identifying that niche in the market and seeing that, that ALGS was a big and legitimate competition, and this was an esport that had a lot of potential about it. And then getting together with Roots, where we kind of, then had these like complementary skill sets that allowed us to sort of put all this stuff on together.
So what was it like kind of starting a business as well? Because like I think going into starting a business in esports was probably, I don't know, I feel like that would be one of the scarier things you might be able to do at that point in time. Essentially, I mean, this is my assumption, but essentially you don't really have any skills as far as owning a business or making a business is concerned. You're not a production guy. You're starting a production company, basically. You're now somewhat involved in like tournament management to an extent and like socials and stuff like that. So it's like all of this coming together, all these skills that you now have to learn basically from the ground up. Plus it feels like the expectations are never higher necessarily than when you're doing a branded for the publisher broadcast. So what's the experience like building this business from the ground up in esports when, you know, you don't necessarily have these kinds of skills? And what kind of skills did you have to learn along the way?
Yeah, it's crazy on that front, right? Like I think about my sort of like my friends and my family, and like no one is doing that, right? It's like, you know, there's no one in my family who's like an entrepreneur almost, right? They're all like they work their salaries, like they do that kind of stuff. And I feel like people who run businesses usually like they come from that, you know, like it's like everyone in their family like owned a business and they just kind of like learn all this stuff about you know, how to do that
How to set
by
up
themselves.
GST and how to do your tax
Yeah,
and how to do your
yeah,
accounting and how to
right.
invoice and all this kind of stuff. And
Exactly. And I was just like, I have, you know, all my friends, yeah, they're just like, you know, whatever, fucking like lawyers and you know whatnot. And I'm just like, I'm the weird one, man, doing this weird thing. Um, and I feel like, yeah, I had almost no help whatsoever in terms of like how to actually do that stuff. It was 100% like us just working out how to do it. You know, whether it was sort of like business admin or even the production side, honestly, it was all just like working out how to do it. But at the same time, it was like this is too good an opportunity. Like I'm not going to just like pass that up because I don't. I'm just going to work out how to do it because like this is the dream. This is literally the dream for me. This is all I ever wanted was to work full time in esports. And after I don't know, however many years of, you know, all this stuff we've talked about so far, this very long journey to get here, like that was, I was finally actually getting an opportunity to work full time in esports. And so, yeah, just like took it with both hands. What have I learned to do? Yeah, like, I mean, it's only me and Roots in terms of like, we don't have any other employees, right? Like everyone else is a contractor who generally we're either getting to but it makes some graphics, some video edits, whatever before, or they're just people we hire on the day as our other, you know, casters, observers, social media people, all that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, we kind of have to split all of that stuff between us. And so yeah, now I'm like I'm HR, I'm accounts, I'm you know, I do like creative stuff as well as being like the caster, and then yeah, obviously like Roots is you know, doing all of the directing stuff and building the show and um yeah, like we've just there's a bit of overlap, but there's a bunch of stuff that we both just had to learn to try and like make this all work together. So it's been a crazy time in terms of like having to learn all that process and stuff. And I think we've still got a ton to learn, obviously. Having not had that kind of experience before, but I think considering how quickly we got thrown into it, like I think it was probably like 2 weeks or something between maybe the first time that EA sort of talked to us and like between us starting the first, I want to say like sort of more official Longshot broadcast, like the first ALGS broadcast, I suppose I should say. Which I don't know, was it actually were you on that one?
I think I started in Winter Circuit. That
Yeah, that was probably
rings a
the
bell.
first one we did, I reckon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I feel like that was the point where you were like, okay, we're doing this a bit more seriously, and I don't know, somewhere along the line, Judge had like stopped doing it, and you were like rotating through a few casters, but
Yeah,
none
we
of
had
them
like
seemed to stick, and
yeah.
then you were like, all right, we're just gonna talk to Jordan and see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and that's yeah, and like yeah, Swifty got involved. He did one of the there was like another tournament that we did, you know, just completely free, but just to sort of put on a showcase of like what we could do, and that was yeah, that was definitely Swifty giving us some help with sort of upgrading and taking us from the next level from that just like oh, it's literally just me and Roots and maybe another caster to putting on like a more legit show.
And it's actually interesting that you mentioned Swifty because that's kind of where I want to take this next because obviously when it comes to Longshot and when it comes to APAC South in terms of the broadcast, I feel like there was like this fairly rapid expansion over the course of maybe like couple of years. I think it was like we were doing bedroom casts for like maybe a year or a year and a half, and then we were going to well, you were in Melbourne, I was going to Melbourne, and you had a couple of other guys like Avril flew down at one point. You were sort of bringing Xenox and stuff in for broadcast in the studio, in the order studio. So there was obviously like this involvement from Swifty as a broadcast help assistant man, whatever it was, and you know you were doing that online, and then he went to order, and then Roots ended up kind of getting the job at order as well, and there was like this, it was all a little bit intertwined, even though these were like separate businesses and separate entities, right? Longshot and Order seemed to be like working in unison to sort of provide this broadcast. So I wanted to sort of talk about like that rapid expansion and what that was sort of all like for you, and how, you know, you guys were able to sort of expand the broadcast and kind of innovate, because it wasn't just like the studio stuff. It was, you know, we've heard these discussions around, you know, people are always really excited about like what Longshot's doing in terms of like production quality and like listen-ins and stats and graphics, and like you guys have the, you know, those flyovers that you're doing now. Like there's always something kind of in the back end. So like how is this all kind of coming together? Also, in addition to, you know, the fact that you're now trying to get studio shows at this time, starting to get studio shows online. So it's like, it's all really like scaling up, you know. It's even gone from like you said, like it very quickly went from being, you know, you guys are just doing it kind of for fun, to now you're doing ALGS, to now you're doing ALGS in a studio, and you're employing people and you're flying people and all this kind of stuff. So how's that all integrating together? And you know, was that kind of like where you found maybe the peak of like what Longshot could like deliver as a broadcast?
Yeah, so we essentially had the first 6 months, which was, I think, winter circuit and maybe like autumn circuit. Bad with seasons. Anyway, that first 6 months, and then we had the first year of the ALGS circuit itself. So there was that first 18 months, I think, and then we started, you know, our talks with the EA about year 2 of ALGS, and we are like, all right, cool. What can we do different? What can we make better than before, right? Because I think, you know, when you're talking about all those sort of broadcast features and stuff that we bring up, right? And you know what we've done with stats that kind of like no one else has done. You know, why we're innovating with our flyovers and all those other things. It's because we're just like massive esports nerds, right? Like that's, you know, at heart, me and Roots, we just love our esports. We love Apex. We've been involved with it for such a long time, and when we think about what we want to see on a broadcast, we're thinking about it from that point of view. We're thinking about it from, you know, people who have watched a lot in the past. We know what the core esports audience wants because we are. What do you like?
I've just thought like this is like the cliche, you know, where it's like for esports fans by esports fans. Like that's literally what you're selling me right now, and I just can't stop thinking about like, you know, like for gamers by gamers. It's like, oh come on, dude. But like, yeah, I get where you're coming from and what you're saying.
But I mean, I think that's why, as such a small operation, because you got to remember, dude, like it's, as I said, it's like it's 2 people for a long time, you know, as the core part of this business that you know, we're going up against essentially like in one way we're competing with like the main Apex broadcast that EA is putting on themselves, right? You know, we've had some other production studios behind in the past and whatnot, but it's like there's a lot of people involved in that. You know, there's a lot of money going into those broadcasts, right? Like, and I think something that we're always very proud of is like what we are getting done with, you know, comparatively very little. I think is been extremely impressive. And yeah, part of that is just because we can just drill down right into the middle of it and be like, we know exactly, you know, what the audience wants because we are the audience essentially, right? Like we're not outsiders in any way. And lost my train of thought there.
What I was going to say was
laughed me out of my.
What I was going to lead into
groove.
next was like, how does that sort of integration with order happen and work? Because that's obviously like I felt like that was a really big deal at the time, and you know that's where things were really like on the rise for.
Yes, yeah. So we were like, what can we do next, right? Like, you know, we started up. We've got these online broadcasts that they're going pretty well. You know, Swifty was, you know, just kind of like producing it from his bedroom at that point. He and Roots both get picked up by Order. You know, awesome for them. They get their other their full-time esports jobs, and then, you know, as Roots explained in his episode, right, he's always trying to do like 4 different things at once. So of course he's
got a problem.
You know,
that guy.
Yeah, he's just like, yeah, I'll sort of stack another job on the top. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So they get involved in Order, and then of course we get that sort of collaboration, and it's like, okay, what do we want to do for next year? Hey, let's do a studio, man. Like, you know, I've done a lot of bedroom casts in my time. Like, I'd rather be in a studio. The quality is always better. You know, as a caster yourself, like how much better the casting specifically gets when you can just look at the other person and be like, you know, hand signals, whatever it is, the instant, you know, no delay over online. You're looking at the same things. There's just so many reasons why studio casts, you know, come across a lot better in those reasons, right? So we were like, if we can do that, we want to do that. And Order gave us that option. because they were starting up their studio. I guess we knew far enough in advance with those guys working with them that, when we were going to try and sort of get that online which in the end was a little bit touch and go, where you might go back to that one broadcast where it looks like we're like casting out of a closet and there's just like a black like curtain behind us, basically. That was the touch and go part, but eventually we sort of got it up and running and it was looking pretty good. But yeah, it was kind of that push to always just be trying to do something better that sort of made us want to go with order.
Yeah, and so I guess what I'm trying to get here is like how I don't know necessarily how much that like affected you as a business, and like obviously Roots is now kind of splitting his time, and is this having an impact on Longshot, because like you're like Longshot solely, right? You were pretty much only doing Longshot at this point in time. Yeah. Roots is splitting his time between Order and Longshot, and is this like difficult, or is it making things better? Is life like basically where is this sending you, like in the direction as far as like your career growth? Is this a good thing for you? Is Order and Longshot and Apex and everything going in the right direction at this point in time?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I'm not going to say it wasn't like, obviously having like Swifty is just working for Order, right? I am just working for Longshot, and Roots is kind of in the middle with both. Like I think that was probably not ideal in terms of whenever you sort of like needed to work something out, there's like a bit of like conflict of interest sort of going on there sometimes. But I think for the most part we dealt with that pretty well, and it didn't sort of, in the end, didn't really end up sort of causing any issues. It was probably more of a help than a hindrance, right? Mm-hmm. Because I mean, yeah, like where else would we have managed to like get a studio cast up and running? I don't think we could have without that partnership with Order.
Right. All right. And then that, because the reason I'm sort of leading it in this direction is because around this time is when you first sort of got the international opportunity with Apex Legends. So it sort of feels like everything in your career and your life and whatever has been kind of building to this point, and everything's going in the right direction, and slowly but surely, you're having success domestically, you're having success in a business sense, you're having success as a caster, and now you're being invited overseas to sort of cast in Sweden, and this was the first time that you went and casted overseas. Now, something that most people probably don't know is that you and I actually, prior to that, were in talks to potentially be involved in an international event that was going to happen at some point, but didn't ever end up happening because it got cancelled. If you don't remember this, I definitely remember. It was like a London thing or something. It was like the year prior. It was like 6 months prior.
Oh,
I got an email.
Like right.
Yeah, and I don't know what it was. Was it championship or something? I can't remember, but it was like...
It was, I think it was the Split One playoffs.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
It was essentially... Yeah, like what
the same thing, but 6 months prior.
Split One playoffs, and then got COVID.
So we got to the point where like that was like, it seemed like to me like semi locked in. At least we'd gotten to the point where we were talking about like rates and stuff, and then it got cancelled because of COVID and stuff, and it was like, oh fuck, like that could have been it. Like we were like almost there, and then it didn't end up happening. But then Sweden comes around, and I think the scenario was you more or less got locked in like straight away. It was like, yeah, we're going to use Genome, and then it was kind of like, oh, who else are we going to get? And, then there was me, and like Xenox was floated as well. And like in the end, we all three went overseas together.
Yeah.
And it was pretty cool. For me, awesome. It was the first time since COVID had happened that I was able to go overseas. And for you, like you said, first time overseas, and maybe not first time overseas, but overseas for esports.
Just don't include New Zealand. It just doesn't count.
Yeah, it doesn't count. Doesn't really count.
Same country.
Kind of, but not really. But like this was obviously a big fucking deal, right? So like, was this?
It wasn't in like it wasn't in like a dilapidated like nightclub, right? Sure. Like the vibes were slightly different.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about like securing that gig, and did you ever really like see yourself casting an international event, like when you started casting Overwatch back in the day, for example? And again, yeah, you did New Zealand, but like a big, like this is a big tier 1 international LAN over in Sweden. Did you ever in your wildest dreams sort of expect that this was a possibility? I feel like you're someone who's quite confident in your abilities and stuff, so I feel like the answer maybe at that time probably was yes, but what was it like for you that to be here and to be doing that and getting that opportunity.
Yeah, no, I hope for it. I think yes, I did. And you're right. Like I do have like confidence in myself, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm still here. Honestly, it's like yeah, I guess we kind of like skipped over that a little bit, but when we first got that contract from EA, right, the very first one that Longshot got, like that was just a wild time in my life. That was in the space of 2 weeks, I had broken up with my partner of 10 years, right? So long-term relationship, living together, everything, and we broke up. And then 2 weeks later, I'm gonna remember this was after the travel job. So I'd been unemployed for like a year. Um, and then I got the call from EA. It was like, would you like your dream job?
Yeah.
Like the range of emotions in like that short a period of time was just bizarre. But one of the reasons I think that like, I'd kind of kept pushing for with Longshot in that period of time was because yeah, I did have that confidence in myself even at that like at that time where I was like severely depressed. Like yeah, my relationship was like breaking down. I was unemployed. Like it didn't, I mean, that's definitely like the worst my life has been so far. And I've been very lucky in a lot of ways. Thankfully. But that kind of, yeah, gave me that just like core belief in myself that even no matter what else had happened, all this stuff that had gone wrong and, that I could still make something of myself, that I was still like, I could get there. And yeah, I guess that kind of it proved me right when I finally got that email and said, yeah, do you want to go? Well, yeah, you're right. Like I almost had that glimpse at London, right? And I was like, oh, I made it. Then
Yeah.
but I suppose after that happened, I was like, well, if they offered me this, like surely they're going to offer me the next one, right?
Right.
Which they did, and we got to Sweden, and yeah, had the best time. Honestly, like that was such a fun event for so many reasons.
It's funny that that you would go there with Xenox in the end as well, because like
Yeah,
it's like a circular kind of thing
yeah,
where like you first
yeah,
went to
yeah.
New Zealand and he was there, and then you first go to Sweden and you're in a different title, both of you, but you're both sort of
Mm.
there. So did it feel like maybe it was a long time coming, right? Because you'd been doing Overwatch for a long time, you'd had like some degrees of success within domestic. For example, like I think even as far as Overwatch is concerned, domestically you were more successful than most people were in their entire casting careers in ANZ, for example. So you've had some degrees of success prior, but you'd never really felt like you'd maybe hit that moment that you kind of wanted to. Was this kind of like that moment? Was this like, oh fuck, I've finally made it?
Yeah. No, 100% it was. That first tier 1 event just feels incredible. And like, yeah, I've told you this, I think, another time, but I guess it's probably worth bringing up here again as well. Is like I think it felt even more circular than that because yeah, Xenox was, one of the first people I ever started casting out with. Like we were both casting in those GameStar, and we started at exactly the same time when we were starting out in Overwatch.
Hmm.
But also like one of the reasons I got into casting, or like maybe one of the things that sort of like prompted me to get into casting, was literally watching a YouTube video of yours.
Oh really? I didn't know this.
I have told you once before, but like
I don't remember.
It was like I think you actually made like an updated version of it, but it was like the original one where you were like
Oh.
how to get into casting.
Yeah, I think I remember these videos. I think I don't know if I've hidden them and privated them, like unlisted them or something. But
Yeah.
these were from like 2016 or something.
Yeah.
Me just in my bedroom, just like talking to the camera. Yeah.
Yep. And it was the same old like the advice you give to everyone who asks you about getting into casting, right? And you just like just do it.
Do it.
Literally just find anything you can and just start casting and just do it. But like legitimately it was one of the things that like led me to like buying that first microphone, which my blue Nessie, which sat under my desk, I reckon, for about 6 months. This was back in the Pastafarians time when I was like trying to
Hell yeah.
trying to play. And then I was like, nope, all right, let's get the microphone out and start casting instead. So like, yeah, like going over with you two guys was super special, I think, for that reason. It was also nice because like at that point it was maybe a little bit big and scary in terms of like got all these other like really cool talent. I feel like I was the smallest by far out of everyone who was at that event. Like everyone else, I think was a lot more established in terms of their presence, either in esports generally or maybe even just in Apex. And obviously you and Xenox have both done international stuff before. So it was kind of nice having you guys there, and we could bond with the Aussie boys and stuff as well as kind of getting to know the new casters and stuff from overseas. And then you just you had the mind-blowing experience of Reignite winning, of an Australian team, of like one of the biggest moments in Australian esports history happening, and it's my first LAN event.
Yeah, I remember standing in the green room. We were standing in the green room together, watching the show, and I was like, you can kind of see it happening in front of your eyes, but you're not really believing it. I can remember, I can still remember where the TV was, like where you were standing, and how it was all, and like the way that you reacted, because you were like really hyped about it or something, and I was watching it happen. I was like, surely this isn't happening, because this doesn't happen to ANZ Esports, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't happen. Like every time you think it's going to happen, they find a way to fucking lose, or something like that happens in every other title.
Punching, I can't remember who, one of them gets down and they're like punching them across the open ground to like try and res them behind the rock. And it was just like, it was such a surreal moment, and it just seemed so improbable. Yeah.
So, I mean, at that time as well, and this kind of ties back into APAC South, like what did you think the implications of that would actually be for APAC South? Because like when I was watching that, I was thinking, fuck, okay, an APAC South team has won the first big event back. People are going to be like super high on Apex on APAC South and Apex now from ANZ and stuff like that. Was any of that going through your mind, or were you just sort of like living in the moment?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm generally actually pretty good at mindfulness, I guess, which is like essentially just like living in the moment. And yeah, no, I was just enjoying myself, man. I was having the best time. I mean, I got to cast, not the winning moment, but I got to cast like the grand final in my first international event. Like I thought it'd be ages before that, and it works a little bit different in Apex, I guess, because you generally have like two pairs like rotating through. But like I watch so much like CS and stuff sort of coming into the scene, and like it's always a really big thing when you get asked to cast the grand final in CS. And oftentimes it will take like years, right? Like, you work, because they generally have big talent rosters, and you maybe it's like, oh, we'll get to cast a quarter this time. Oh, I get to cast a semi this time. And then like finally you get the call up for the grand final, and it's a massive moment for your career as a caster. So like, yeah, honestly, getting put on the grand finals for the first event was just like crazy, man.
So did you sort of feel like this was maybe a breakout moment for you in Apex? And I don't know if maybe again, if at the time you felt like that, or is it just like in hindsight? Because the way I look at it from my perspective about you is that, you were obviously kind of like the guy in APAC South, but like being the guy in APAC South is a bit, like it's all right, but like it's like whatever. Normally you don't really get these kinds of opportunities, but I think this is kind of where at this event, and then obviously at the next event where you went again, is where you kind of solidify yourself on that international circuit. So were you kind of feeling like that was happening at that time as well?
Yeah, I think after Sweden, so super happy about sort of my performance there, about getting us to cast grand final, all that kind of thing, was phenomenal. But like, I don't know if you feel like this, but maybe it's the Overwatch experience. Maybe it's just sort of esports in general. But like, I've definitely got trust issues with esports, right? Like nothing ever feels solid.
That's kind of what I was saying with when I was watching Reignite win that game. I was like, I'm seeing them win the game, but I'm not trusting myself to believe it until I literally see Reignite wins pop up on the screen.
It always feels like you're just like one random person's decision away from like just losing everything.
Yeah.
And that's happened since then with esports, and it's probably going to happen again. It just always feels like you're right on a knife's edge. Like you don't feel solid in anything. And I don't know if that's just me, or if that's like a fair mentality to have when you're working in esports, because it just is that precarious. Because like every time I just think about, whatever, like, my friends' jobs or whatever, as I'm just like, you would have to screw up so badly
to
get fired. right? Like you would genuinely have to be like such a bad employee to get fired out of your, professional services job. And I'm like, I can do everything right and still not get hired and not even know why. Like sometimes, like with that Overwatch stuff, man, I didn't find out until maybe like a year or two after, like what really went on. And you have to just like live with that. You just have to live with like this sense of like of not knowing, which is just it's terrible. But like also having to like anticipate that in the future because you're just not sure about kind of what's going on in the future. But so it was really, I think, only after maybe the second international event in Rally where I was like, okay, I've done enough. Or like I'm doing well enough that I feel confident about getting the next event.
Hmm.
Like I feel confident that like I'm a known quantity that they're gonna want me to keep coming back. That my position in Apex is at least like solid. Like it's never guaranteed, and you definitely don't want to be taking things for granted in esports because no one really does have like tenure essentially, right? So you've always got to be it's such an in-demand job. There's always going to be someone like putting in those mad hours and like and trying to get it out from under you, right? But like um yeah, I think after the next event at Rally, I started to feel like I can at least like hope for this in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, and obviously, to this day, you're still working these international Apex events. But one thing that I wanted to sort of touch on, and this is a little bit more poignant towards the later events that you went to, and not so much the first one. So we're kind of moving on in the timeline a little bit. Is that obviously from that first event, Xenox and I went, but since then we've not gone to any of these other international events. And as a byproduct of that, maybe, or as a byproduct of some other factors, you haven't actually really ended up casting much anymore at the international events. You have been more or less relegated to desk work, which, to be honest, I think you do a good job of because obviously you're
relegated.
Well, I mean, that's just the nature of the beast, right? When it comes to esports, everyone wants to be a caster. Not everyone, but like to an extent, everyone kind of wants to be a caster. And I know from your conversations that we've had that you want to cast as well, so that's why I say it in that sense. So what is this sort of a situation like for you? Because obviously without Xenox and or myself going over, you don't necessarily have like a defined casting duo, and obviously everyone else kind of does. They're all going over as duos, so that means you're now on the desk, which again I was going to say I think you do a pretty good job of because that your mind, you are that kind of person when it comes to like broadcast. You're a color cast or an analyst. You kind of like to go in depth with these kinds of things, so you can definitely fill that role on the desk, but that's not necessarily what you want to be doing. So maybe talk to me about like it's a bit bittersweet. Is it like you do get the jobs and you're really happy and excited to be there, but there's always like, oh man, what if I could cast? I think that's how I would feel anyway.
Yeah. I'm pretty philosophical about it, I think, because in one way, I mean, look, to start off with, you get paid the same either way, right? So like as far as the job goes, like you're still doing the job, you're still getting the job, right? It's I don't know. I guess if there's anyone watching this who kind of like being like, oh, maybe like cast is like a better thing. No, it's like it goes down to like whatever individual, how you negotiate, all that sort of stuff. It's not like casters like just generally get like a better rate than analysts or something like that. It's pretty much the same. So yeah, I guess in terms of like what I want or what I prefer to do, I do probably have more fun casting. But as I said, I'm a bit philosophical about it. And like when you look at the team that we've had at the last couple of Apex events, I would say I'm probably the best placed out of all of those talent to be on the desk analyzing the game, right? And you need someone doing that. You need someone there who's really just interested in the nitty gritty. Someone who loves like just getting into the detail, and whatever, breaking down the rotations, talking about the different team comps and why they work out. Whatever it is, bringing that side of it to the game. And I think I can do that in cast as well. And I think there's things that I do well casting that where you can kind of blend that in, and that's a positive. But I think if you look at that team overall, it just kind of makes sense to have me on the desk there because maybe it's partly because Apex is a bit of an immature game that we don't have. It's not like we've got a lot of like ex-pros or whatever that you can just kind of like slot in, because that's always the risk, right? As in my spot, if you're not an ex-pro, I think you're essentially always at risk of getting supplanted by an ex-pro if you were a desk, specifically a desk analyst. So I think in terms of, sort of career longevity and stuff, like color casting is probably the sweet spot where the mechanical skills required to be a color caster, not every ex-pro has that. Can you just stick an ex-pro on the desk and like essentially the bar for being able to, whatever, talk fast enough, be interesting enough, be entertaining enough, is higher for a color caster than it is for an analyst, in my opinion. And that's why it's a lot easier to stick an ex-pro into that position where they just have, generally more knowledge, especially if they're like a current pro or whatever, than someone who doesn't have that experience has been. So look, I don't know. We'll see what happens in the future. I've cast at every event I've been to so far, but you're right. I did cast the most in Sweden, and I'd love to have that constant duo, right? To be able to just be like, go overseas and, whatever, whether it was you or me or, and we both get to go out and cast as a duo, and we've had all this experience throughout the season. And then we continue to do that. Like, honestly, that'd be awesome. But if, for whatever reason, it's just me kind of going over at the moment. Yeah, I guess we'll just have to see what happens, because I definitely do want to be casting a bit more. Yeah.
All right. Well, I wanted to sort of take it in a different direction as well, just because, again, on the same topic of being the sole representative from APAC South, I mean, it's not just the sole representative from APAC South. It's kind of like you are the sole representative and advocate really for all of APAC, right? There is no one there that covers APAC North at all. You're the only one from APAC South.
To be fair, they do have had on-site APAC North broadcasters for the last couple of events. Obviously, that's not going out on the English stream so much, right? But I guess, yeah, so you're not necessarily getting that like expertise on the English broadcast, but you are at least servicing that audience with their own language.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to get is like, it's from your perspective, is there like this degree of like, I don't think pressure is necessarily the right word, but like you are the person who more or less sets the expectations and storylines for APAC South, definitely. And I think by extension, you also represent APAC as a greater whole, just because you're from there, more or less.
Yeah.
So do you ever sort of feel like that weight of expectation on your shoulders, maybe to like be the guy that's, I don't know if it's I don't know how to necessarily describe this, but like, sometimes I feel like APAC and APAC North and APAC, whatever, just in general, in all titles, kind of get a bit of a bad rap. You go overseas and people are always talking about Europe, people are always talking about North America, and it's like, all right.
No, I know what you mean. We've got that chip on our shoulder, right?
Yeah, so you're the guy that has to fly the flag, right? That's the terminology that I want to use.
We've had so many esports and events and whatever where we don't get our due, where we don't get that amount of coverage. Yeah, no, I absolutely feel that. Not that I feel like pressure to do it. It's more like I feel like a responsibility, I guess, is a better word. A responsibility to make sure that we are represented, because even now, even in Apex, in the game that we are like the best at in the world, out of anything, I would say, out of any esport right now, we're performing the best. I don't really think that's questionable, right? Like, we're literally winning world championships, and we have multiple teams in like top 5, top 10, compared to other esports where it's like we can barely even get into the main event. So the fact that we're doing so well, and even then, if you listen to, some commentary in Apex, oftentimes we still get left out. Oftentimes it's still like, we're like not in the discussion, even when we have like at times literally the best team in the world, or the best IGL in the world, or whatever the conversation is, right? Somehow still get talked down on occasionally. So yeah, I definitely do feel like a responsibility to like keep reminding people that we are actually that good in this game. It's not a meme. It's not me just
not a
like
one-hit wonder or a fluke.
bringing like copium from the region. Like we genuinely are that good and we deserve that respect. Yeah, I mean, like, shout out to Wig, honestly. Like running the watch parties and everything at the moment because he watches everything. But has that audience that's like, a lot in North America, like probably getting more and more global, I imagine, as he goes on. But like starting off with that kind of that region, like because he watches everything now, I think he's actually starting to help other people understand how good some of like the best teams in the other regions are and bringing that love. So like slowly we're getting there in terms of like convincing everyone that we're the real deal. But for now, yes, I definitely am that person and like want to continue to be someone who makes sure that we get our due.
All right, so we'll take a shift back away from doing international discussions and we come back to more domestic stuff. And again, we're sort of jumping around the timeline a little bit, but around this point is where order kind of collapses. So I just want to talk about the implications of that from your perspective and from how that sort of affected your business and how it affected ALGS as well, because instantly it's like, all right, there goes the studio. So no more studio shows anymore. Roots is now, doing whatever he does. He doesn't have his job at Order anymore. So how does this all sort of have an interplay with Longshot and your business and everything?
Yeah, well, I mean, like as you said, that this was definitely probably affected Roots a lot more than like me or Longshots specifically. Him losing that like full-time income is obviously pretty rough. He just moved down to Melbourne. It did mean we couldn't do the studio anymore. But that actually wasn't the worst thing for us. There was, obviously in the last, 6 to 12 months, there's been a lot of like belt tightening around esports in general. So, would we have continued to do that? I'm not even sure, honestly. Since then, we've moved back to just doing the broadcast from home. But I think it's kind of worked out in some ways because, we've essentially like we invested in our own gear now. So like we at least like it's kind of on us. We're not just like paying Order every day to like whatever, rent the studio, rent their gear, all that kind of thing. So that was probably a bit of a hit for us in like the short term, but I think hopefully in the long term, we'll probably work out even better. As far as like the level of the show and stuff, I guess the level of the production we're bringing out, like no, like an online show is never going to look as good as like an in-studio show, right? Like that sucks. That sucks for me as a caster. But we're still trying to bring the same in terms of like, the graphics and the stats and all that kind of stuff we use. So we're at least still, I don't think any of that has dropped off. It's really just like what it looks like in front of the camera. But like, to put this in context, you got to remember the main channel for EU and NA when they have done their like during the split broadcast have never had a studio show.
Yeah.
So it's not like, I don't know, it's not like we're like dropping super far behind or anything, right? Like there's always been an online show for them as far as NA and EU like in split stuff. So it was honestly pretty incredible that we did manage to get a studio show up and running with kind of what we had to work with there. So look, it sucks a little bit that we've had to go back to that because I even just from like personally and from a caster perspective, I like getting the reps in the studio.
Yeah.
But it would be, I think, honestly pretty tough for us to get back to there. Like the Order opportunity was kind of a bit of a one-off, I think, in terms of sort of giving us that opportunity. And yeah, who knows? Like crazy things have happened, I suppose, but like I'm not sure if we'll be able to get there in the sort of the near future again.
All right. Well, one of the things that I sort of wanted to go into, and we're sort of to an extent kind of up to date now with all the major aspects of your career, like all the major points, right? So let's just, for the sake of argument, say we're like now where we're at. Obviously, there was a few more like couple of shows in there, like your APAC South seasons and stuff that we haven't gone into super depth to talk about. But I think they're not necessarily like a major keystone moment for your career. So you're kind of going through the motions now. You're doing APAC South, you're doing international shows. Like that's a regularity at this point, right? It doesn't necessarily need to go super in depth to. But we're kind of at that point now where we've caught up to current day, business as usual. We're sort of trucking along. We're still doing all these shows and stuff like that. But I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on, the greater Apex ecosystem, because when I look at your career and your broadcast and stuff like that, it's pretty much just ALGS, right? You only do ALGS, you only do that kind of thing. So, why is there no like third-party tournaments? Have you, not ever had the opportunity? Are there no third-party tournaments? What's the situation there? Because like, I feel like fairly unique among casters that are fairly defined in their titles to only be doing one tournament, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess the short answer is there's not a lot of them around. I've been asked to do a couple locally, and they have always conflicted with ALGS weekends. So like, I don't know, work your shit out, TOs. Like, of all the weekends in the year, there's not that many that Apex is running.
I was going to say, there's not too many.
Why the fuck would you make them conflict with like the biggest show in town? It makes no sense at all. So yeah, I'd like to have some extra Apex events to work on, but they're gonna have to work out the scheduling, because obviously I'm never gonna drop Apex like ALGS for like some other Apex tournament, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows? Maybe they've got their reasons for doing that. Maybe not. Either way, it'd be nice if they were a little bit more spread out. Apart from that, because I mean, it would have to be overseas work, I guess, which is possible. Like, I haven't been asked to do any of those. Oh, there was one tiny one, but it was a bit, I don't know, it was a bit dodgy. Anyway, so yeah, like absolutely. If people want to, I think I definitely have the international knowledge now after doing a lot of these other casts and stuff, that I definitely could do some more work overseas, and I would like to get some of that. But you're always coming up against people from those regions, so that's a tough ask, I suppose. So in terms of like how the Apex ecosystem is growing, I think one of the problems is just that's a general esports problem at the moment. Like, there's not a lot of cash going around, right? Like, there's not a lot of sponsorships going around. Actually finding the money to put on a third-party tournament is pretty tough at the moment. Publisher leagues do well because the games make squillions of dollars, and they will always have the money, if they are so inclined, to have first-party publisher leagues, ALGS, all that kind of stuff, right? That's always going to be a possibility. But trying to juice the money out of other sponsors and get other Apex events going, man, it's a tough ask at the moment, honestly.
What do you think about the future of Apex Legends as an esport and as a game? And by extension, I guess, what's the future look like for you, maybe as a caster, and for Longshot as well? And also, where do you sort of see Apex going in a direction that, like, is there a direction that you'd like to see it going that it's currently not going in? Like, where would you like to see it go, or are you happy with how it is progressing at the moment?
Oh yeah, that's a big one. I think ALGS is awesome. I think you always need a good balance between first party and third party events. And as you've just said, there's not a huge amount of third party on the floor right now, but that's not necessarily anyone else's fault. That's kind of just like an industry wide issue. So does ALGS like provide enough in the meantime? Yeah, I think so. People always want more, right? Like, there's people on Twitter being like, hey man, we should have like a LAN in like all 5 regions. They'll be like, yeah, we should have like,
sounds good to me.
I mean, and I'm like, yeah, man, I'd take that. I wouldn't mind the extra work. That'd be kind of nice. Is that realistic? Like, no. I think we, like, genuinely going back to like the Overwatch example, or even like, I think PUBG does this as well sometimes. I think there's probably room for one big event, a first party event in the off season that's like something a bit more fun.
Yeah.
Right? Something a bit more interesting. So like a World Cup event, nation, like what do they have, like Nations Cup or whatever it is in PUBG. Obviously the Overwatch World Cup always had a fun lead up to it. and was a cool concept. I think something like that could definitely work. I'm sure people have other ideas, whether they try something, whatever, like an arenas tournament, not gun run, whatever, like one of those things. Maybe you could do something fun like that. Um, I think there's definitely just room for something that like will get other people interested in Apex. Like, because if you can, the good thing about like World Cup and whatnot was, right, that like I think other people got interested in it that weren't
Yep.
necessarily just interested in hardcore esports. Because
People
they're
get
just like,
interested
whatever, they
because they
cheer
can
their
cheer
country on.
for Team Australia or
Yeah,
whatever. Yep. And
and they
people who are not interested in that specific title, I found as well with Overwatch and with PUBG, just watch the World Cup because why not? Like it just seems like for some reason people who are just interested in esports in general will watch the World Cups even though they're not necessarily super interested in the title.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it has that effect of like sort of broadening the esports audience just in general for that game, which is obviously a very good thing. So I think, yeah, I feel like we could fill out the calendar just a little bit more with that in terms of like the support that EA provides. But I honestly like, don't really have much bad to say about how EA have been handling it so far. I actually think, especially, having worked quite closely with a lot of these guys through both Longshot and like at the events in person. Like they've just been the best publisher to deal with out of anyone I've sort of like touched at all so far. There's a lot of people there who I think really get esports and like have the scene's best interest at heart, and you know um yeah, have done a lot of really good things for the scene. And people are always going to ask for more, but like I think when you've sort of been around a lot of sides of it, probably as long as we have, you kind of get a sense of like, what's fair and like what is actually doable from like, the big company perspective, and how much money they're going to pump into it and that sort of stuff. And I think they do a pretty good job considering. So, um, yeah, I don't know if there's yeah, what else can we do like to sort of pump up more Apex, right? I feel like it's kind of it's knocking on the door of being like a tier 1 esport. I think it's definitely not there yet, but one of the biggest positive signs for it is like doesn't matter how much any people complain about seasons or call dead game or whatever. I think it's since like season 7 or something like that. Every season's release has had more players than the last. It is growing, and that just doesn't happen, right, in esports, especially. Um, games tend to have a big peak at the start, which Apex did, and they just fall off hugely. And Apex had a little bit of that, but then since season 7, it's actually kept going back up again. And that's such a good sign for an esport that it's got legs, that it's going to keep going. And as much as I don't care about like, loot boxes and all that kind of stuff, like I literally have 1,000 Hearthstone card packs and like 100 eggs in TFT and like probably about 100 Apex packs right now that I haven't opened. Like that stuff, like that content these days is what keeps games going, right? And Apex seem to be delivering on that, because that is keeping the player base healthy and keeping people coming back and keeping things excited. So if they can keep doing that, then yeah, I don't know, man. This game's got like I think some serious potential to be around for quite a while.
Hi there. If you made it this far and you're enjoying the content, please make sure you subscribe. Or if you really want to go the extra mile, you can support me on buymeacoffee.com/elfishguy. There's a link in the bio.